few months ago, I decided to buy a GoPro Hero 8 to film my behind-the-scenes videos of my photography, which some of you may have recently seen. The decision to purchase the camera was really hard for me because as a filmmaker, I of course want the quality of my videos to have a high standard, and I wasn't quite sure if the little GoPro was going to be good enough for me. I only played around with it a little before shooting my first video with it, which came out back in May. Since then, I've collected more experience with the GoPro and I've learned a lot. Turns out that my first 4 photography videos, I had my settings to not even close to max. Now, after collecting more experiences and knowledge, I want to share what I learned and what I would consider to be the best settings on the GoPro Hero 8 to get the most out of the little action camera. So the settings I'm about to present are the ones I use to get the best possible video quality if I plan to edit and color grade the footage. I would not recommend these for casual use. So when the GoPro is in video mode, you can tap this button at the bottom to open up your settings presets. By tapping the pen on the right side, you can open the settings menu of the preset and change them to your liking. Let's go over these from top to bottom. The first setting is the resolution and frame rate. The Hero 8 offers a video resolution up to 4K at a max frame rate of 50 frames per second. Depending on where in the world you live, this can also be 60 frames. You can easily change the standard frame rates of your GoPro in the general menu in the anti-flicker setting. So when shooting video, which I do not intend to slow down in post-production, I simply choose 25 frames per second. Yes, the GoPro does also offer 24 frames per second, which is considered to be the most cinematic. However, my whole workflow is for some reason set to 25 frames per second, and I don't think that one frame really makes a difference, so I just go with 25. If you know that you want slow motion video, you do have the possibility to shoot in 4K and choose 50 frames per second, and with lower resolutions you can even get higher frame rates. When it comes to resolution, I shot my first videos in 2.7K to save storage space, because the 4K footage is massive. However, after once shooting 4K, I did notice a significant improvement in the overall image quality. Due to the tiny sensor of the GoPro, the footage can easily get noisy in slightly darker lighting situations, and that noise is handled better with a higher resolution. Therefore, I now shoot everything in 4K. As you might have already noticed, the GoPro also offers resolutions in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which looks like this. Because nowadays the standard aspect ratio for video is 16:9, I don't see much use for these in my workflow. However, this could be interesting for reframing. What you can do is use the 4:3 footage in a 16:9 sequence and adjust the vertical position to your liking. The next setting is the digital lens. The choice of lens mainly comes down to what you're shooting and how much wide-angle distortion you're okay with. When shooting my photography videos, I want to get as much as possible in my frame, therefore I shoot with the super view lens, which does give you quite a fisheye look. The opposite of that is the linear lens, which is a cropped version and therefore has no distortion. The GoPro also offers a lens in between those, the wide lens. This one is decently wide and has some visible distortion, but not as strong as the super view lens. When it comes to quality, I did a test to see whether there is a difference. Because the tighter lenses are digital crops, I expected there to be a loss of quality. However, when comparing the 3 settings, I could not really see a noticeable difference. Let's continue to the next setting, which is the stabilization. Because I shoot with the super view lens, I can only choose between off and on, so I have it switched on for stable footage. But if you decide to shoot with the wide lens or the linear lens, you get additional strengths of stabilization. You can set it to high or even higher to boost. The boost setting will strongly crop the image, whereas the high and on setting will only crop the image by 10%. I also did some tests here to see whether the crop affects the image quality, and indeed, when the stabilization is set to boost, there is a noticeable loss in detail. When the stabilization was set to high or simply on, there was probably also a little loss of quality. However, I couldn't really see a difference, so I think it doesn't really matter too much. But as said, I just have it set to on, which is definitely enough for me. The next setting is low light, which apparently is not available when shooting in 4K, so let's skip that. Next we have the digital zoom, which also isn't available in 4K, so let's skip this one as well. Then there's the setting for creating clips with set times while recording. This doesn't have any impact on the image quality and just depends on personal preference and use. Next, the GoPro has a section below called Pro Tune. The first setting is the bitrate, which you can either set to low or high. I would recommend setting this to high to maximize your image quality because it will give you more detailed footage than with a low bitrate. I hope the next setting is not going to make any filmmakers throw up. I have my shutter speed set to auto. This is of course not recommended if you're trying to get a natural look with the GoPro. In bright lighting conditions, you would need an ND filter for the GoPro to be able to shoot with a lower shutter speed, and I don't even have one for my main camera. But actually, I have it set to auto because of my way of using the GoPro. As you know, I've got it strapped to my head, and I don't want to change my settings every time the light changes, therefore I just have it on auto. I don't mind the high shutter speed effect too much. The next setting is the exposure value compensation. This setting depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting a skiing video on a bright sunny day, I would recommend setting the exposure to -0.5, which will make the GoPro record the video a little bit darker, which can protect your highlights from clipping. However, I usually don't shoot in such conditions, and I want a decent amount of detail in my shadows, therefore I don't want to underexpose my footage and just set the EV to 0, which is a good balance. Next up is the white balance, which, again, against the moral values of filmmakers, I have set to auto. To gain maximum control of your footage, it is of course recommended to always set the white balance manually. However, just like the shutter speed, in my way of using the GoPro, I don't want to control the setting myself all the time, therefore it's set to auto. The next two settings concern the ISO value. The ISO minimum I've of course set to as low as possible, and the ISO maximum I've got set to 800. The lower the ISO, the cleaner the footage is going to look, but sometimes I shoot in slightly darker situations, therefore I allow the GoPro to go up to 800. 800 is actually already too high for the GoPro, but I find it still just acceptable. The next setting is an important one, sharpness. A common misunderstanding is that more sharpness equals more detail, which unfortunately is not true. When set to medium or high, the GoPro will add digital sharpening to your footage, which is irreversible and oftentimes just doesn't look good. I recommend setting the sharpness to low, and if necessary you can add extra sharpness in post. The next setting on the GoPro is the color profile. The camera offers a choice of either the natural GoPro colors or the flat look, which is slightly desaturated and has lower contrast. I recommend shooting in the flat color profile to save as much detail as possible and add saturation and contrast etc. in post when color grading your footage. The last three settings concern the audio, therefore they're not really relevant for maximizing your video quality. Below the audio settings you can find the settings for the shortcuts, which also do not influence the video quality. So that's it. After shooting with the GoPro for a few months now, these are the settings that I've found to be the best to maximize your video quality. I hope this video was helpful to you. I know it's quite a technical one compared to my usual content, but next week I'm out shooting again. If the video was helpful, please leave a like for the algorithm, or even better, a comment. If you're new here, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you again next week in the next video. Until then, goodbye.